Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Kneon, and we're going to talk about game makers and unions, video game developers and unionization, and the fact that a lot of game developers are pushing to unionize. I want to talk about this because this sort of touches on a lot of things that we talk about on this channel in regards to the entertainment industry, the media, animation. And there's a big discussion going on right now in a lot of different segments of the entertainment and media landscape about whether or not workers in those industries should unionize. And, I've got some anecdotes. I've got some stories of my own I want to share, and we'll talk about this latest effort by Silicon Valley to unionize, whether or not I think that's going to be successful. I don't know if it is. And we're also going to talk about some other things, the animation industry, crunch time. We're going to talk about the media. We're going to talk about Gizmodo and how the union's working out for them. We're going to talk about Kickstarter attempting to unionize and the blowback that came from that. And really, it just seems like Silicon Valley and Hollywood, they all want to unionize and bring better working conditions to industries that have historically been built on, I'm going to be honest, crunch time, unpaid labor, and it sounds good on paper, but I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to be honest. And I've worked in a lot of these industries, and I'm just saying, I don't know if it's going to work. So before we get into the video, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. We're at almost 90,000 subs, hoping for 100,000 soon. You guys have been awesome. We appreciate the support. Thank you so much. Now, what kicked off this video was this story in the Hollywood Reporter today that game makers are staring down a major union drive. Now, it's no secret that game developers, people working in the video game industry, have been dealing with massive crunch time, a massive amount of hours that have gone unpaid. In fact, if you go out and you look for crunch time or crunch in video games, you're going to find a lot of stories, a lot of those stories actually involving EA. They're actually one of the worst offenders as far as I can tell. But the problem is that this has sort of become the norm in the industry, that it is expected. And this is sort of a double-edged sword, because anybody going into this industry or media or comic books even needs to understand that you don't just punch a clock. You don't go in from 8 to 5, punch a clock, Monday through Friday, for the most part, go home and forget about, your work for a while and get to have a social life. People who work in these industries, whether it's video games or journalism or other tech companies, animation, comic books, even comic books especially now are pretty bad because everybody's freelance. It needs to be made very clear to people who are even thinking about going into these industries that this is what the working conditions are. And I don't think people think about that. They're like, well, I like playing video games and reading comic books and watching animation in my spare time. Therefore, I want to work in these industries, or I want to work in an industry and cover this sort of thing because I have lots of spare time and I play games and I watch movies and I do this and I do that. And boy, wouldn't it be fun to do that for a living? And there's an old saying that says, never make something you love your job. And that's 100% true. If you really love something, I mean, yeah, you can be passionate about it, but if it becomes a job, if you make it a job, you're going to find that everything becomes a job. Case in point, my wife and I, Geeky and I, for 3 years, 3+ years, we actually had a podcast before that, but for 3+ years, we ran a theme park blog and a video channel with a partner. And we've talked a little bit about this before. Because we love going to theme parks. We love Disney. We love the culture. We had a lot of fun doing it. And it was like, okay, let's do this for a living. Let's get paid to travel. Let's get paid to talk about theme parks. Boy, wouldn't that be fun. And you know what? At first it was. But we put a lot of hours, a lot of unpaid hours into a blog that a partner, and you've heard the story, I'm not going to rehash, but basically the partner ran off with a blog and put other people in after we built it up to a certain size. But after a while, it became a job. It did. I never thought I would get to a point where I'm like, oh my God, I just went to to California. I went to Disneyland, and then I have to turn around later this week and go down to Florida again. You know, but it does. It becomes a job, and you lose track of the hours. When you're working in these industries, a lot of times you lose track of the hours, you know, and that happens with anyone who's doing their own thing. Now, I guess the problem becomes when you're working for someone else and they lose track of the hours too, and they abuse the salary system. And this is kind of what's happening in video games right now. Now, here's the thing. While it sounds good on paper to be like, well, I'm going to work my 40-hour week and I'm going to get a big fat check, and I'm going to have all the perks that come with working in the game industry without having to put the hours in. I don't think it's going to go that well for them, because these companies have essentially built their businesses on the backs of employees who are willing to put up with crunch. And a lot of them are younger, you know, and I feel bad for people who are older working in video games or animation or the media, because a lot of times you have families, significant others, you have other responsibilities. When you're young, when you're in your 20s, you can sleep on the couch. You know, you've got nobody to go home to, usually. Now, Geeky and I met when I was between full-time jobs. I used to be a newspaper editor back in the day. Remember newspapers? Yeah, they were a thing. But I used to work ridiculous hours, and I lost track of the time I spent. It wasn't unusual for me to go in at 6 o'clock in the morning and come home at 11:30 at night. I'm not kidding. I was salaried, you know, but I had to stay. I was the boss. I had to stay until everything was done. Everything was out the door, you know, and thankfully, thankfully, Geeky met me when I was going through a bout of freelance. So my hours were up to me. So we had time to date and be together and all that. But prior to meeting her, and even after we got married, I worked hellacious hours. It came with the industry. Everybody knows this. And so I guess my advice would be, knowing this, knowing that that is what these industries are like, there are other options. You do not have to work in the video game industry, or you can work in the game industry on your own terms. You know, maybe make a boutique game with some friends in your garage or something. But it is known, if you work in the video game industry, if you work for a media site, if you work as a journalist, okay, you work for any kind of digital media site, it is known that you will probably be putting in a lot of unpaid time. Now, there are rewards that go with that, being able to work in these industries, but I don't think, maybe people aren't spelling this out clearly enough to folks that want to get into these industries, that this is what you can expect. And it's the same with animation, anything like this. So let's talk about this video game union coming from a Hollywood Reporter, and I'm going to point out that I don't think this is going to work. As global video game spending marked a new high in 2018 at $109 billion, calls to unionize the burgeoning industry's workers have ratcheted into high gear. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this for years, the working conditions being bad. On January 7th, one of the largest labor unions in the U.S. with more than 700,000 members, the Communication Workers of America, revealed plans for a major effort to organize employees for gaming firms. The drive, called the Campaign to Organize Digital Employees, learn to code, right? Could, if successful, bring significant change to an industry that is largely non-union. The game industry is part of the economy that's making truly massive profits, and it's clear that folks are not benefiting to the degree they ought to, says the CWA Director of Organizing, Tom Smith. Yeah, but the reason they're making the profits, I'm going to be honest, and we're going to talk about some examples here. The reason they're making the profit is that they actually bank on a lot of unpaid labor. What could potentially happen is I hate to say it, but if the employees eat up the profits, then employees lose jobs. There's not as much content being created. And it's unfortunate. This is the business model, though, that has become the gaming industry, has become media. It banks on there being a lot of unpaid time. I don't know what's going to happen if you throw a wrench into that. I really don't. The whole thing could implode. Who knows? Nearly half, 47% of workers polled in the 2019 Game Developers Conference State of the Industry survey supported staffers' calls to unionize. And game workers are becoming increasingly vocal about their workplaces. A staff walkout at last May at League of Legends maker Riot Games roiled the industry over the company's forced arbitration policy disclosed in a lawsuit alleging harassment and gender pay disparity. and they settled in August. Blizzard incited ire inside and outside of its Irvine offices when it suspended a professional Hearthstone player following a pro-Hong Kong protester statement in October. Game staffers have long noted arduous work weeks, some even topping 100 hours in certain cases. Yeah, again, this is not hidden from you. If it is, I don't know who the hell you're talking to. Anybody who works in the video game industry, works for digital media, you know, this is understood. It's understood going into it that, like, kiss your free time goodbye, because you're chained to this company, you're chained to this project. You know, if you're a comic book freelancer, you're going to be asked to take on ridiculous deadlines for very little pay. You know, and you have to understand, this is, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right at all. I mean, I regret a lot of time I put in to various businesses and various jobs, you know, because it came at the cost of seeing my family, seeing my kids. My kids, Squid Kings in high school. You know, my daughter is going to be in junior high, and I miss so much of them growing up because I was constantly working in and around media, working jobs that required much more than a 40-hour work week. And I missed a lot of that. You know, even now, doing what we do now, doing YouTube and doing some of the other stuff that we're working on behind the scenes, you know, a typical work day for us is, you know, 8:30 in the morning to like 11 o'clock at night. Now, there are times throughout the day that we can kind of, you know, knock off and maybe watch a TV show or something, but a 10 to 12 to 16-hour workday is not uncommon. You know, but we have to do it because it's our, but the difference is it's our own thing, right? It's our own thing. Only 5% of respondents of last year's State of the Industry survey said they worked an average of 51 to 60 hours a week and less. Even less, 3% listed over 60 hours as their average. Most respondents listed an average work week of 36 to 40 hours. Well, that's pretty normal. 24% of those polled, or 41 to 45. That's pretty normal. The average salary range for such employees can range from $40,000 the low end to more than six figures on the high end for developers. If you're getting paid six figures to work 36 to 40 hours a week, I think you're doing pretty good. I think you're doing pretty good. We have some industry leaders saying they're skeptical. Take-Two Interactive's Strauss Zelnick said that he's not sure what benefit unionization would bring. You know, personal politics can be another hurdle to unionization. According to GWU's official points of unity listed on the website, the organization is committed to remaining non-sectarian and will not censor or deride individuals for their particular political tendency. We'll see what happens. You know, what happened at Google, right? However, it also states that it reserves the right to censor politics that are pro-employer, and also contains a point stating its refusal to allow members into our spaces who actively serve reactionary systems of violence, i.e. police and members of police union. What? Okay. Anyway, so we're non-political as long as the politics align with our politics, I guess. I think this is gonna fail. I think it's gonna fail because I'm gonna give you some examples here of unionization in digital media that is failing. Let's bring up Exhibit A. Gawker, Gizmodo. 2018. Jason Schreier bragging about how much that Kotaku, journalists get paid. Entry level Kotaku journalists, fresh out of school, get paid $50,000 a year. You know how long it took me to make $50,000 a year? I didn't make $50,000 a year right out of school. But here we go. There's a widespread belief based on truth that game journalists don't get paid much. That is true. Most of them don't. Comic book journalists, even less than game journalists. If you work for a game site and want to get paid what you're worth, unionize, all caps. Kotaku's salary minimum for full-time writers is $50,000 a year. Since some folks seem to be misunderstanding this tweet, $50K is a very good salary floor, and we got there by unionizing. For comparison, this 2011 article pegged the average entry-level game journalist salary at $32K. I think it's dropped since then. Now, it depends on the site you're working for, but, comic book journalists, I know they get paid jack squat. I mean, I know they don't get paid much. They usually get paid by the article. Now, we've got those laws in California that people can only write so many articles per week. So, again, this sounds good on paper. Wow, the minimum you're going to make is $50,000 a year. Most places in the country, you can live on that. You can get by in a big city if you've got roommates or whatever. That's not bad, right? Okay, well, let's fast forward to 2020. Ars Technica. Who's on the death watch list? Oh, Geo Media, Gizmodo, owner of Kotaku. They're on the death watch list because this unionization is not working out very well for them, because their current owners, right, and the sites were sold for a song because they weren't generating revenue. So their owners are having some major issues with the union. They are actually moving Deadspin's offices to Chicago because of the union. It's not going well. It's not going well. Those $50,000 a year entry-level jobs, they're not going to be around much longer. So the new editorial director, Paul Maidment, mandated to Deadspin writers that they have to stick to sports. We talked about that because Deadspin would get very, very political. And the new owners, again, who bought Gizmodo for next to nothing because it was pretty much worthless. And I honestly think the union might have had something to do with Univision selling the company because they didn't want to deal with it. But they told them to stick to sports. And now they're moving their offices after this walkout just to make sure they get non-union employees or whatever is going on over there. Now, I have a similar story. When I worked as a newspaper editor back in the day, the company I worked for, the media company I worked for, also ran a commercial printing division. And the commercial printers wanted to unionize. And, you know, I think that they were underpaid for what they did, to be honest, because they were working on major, like, national printing jobs, and they were very good at what they did. They put in very long hours. And I had the utmost respect for the people working in the printing department of the company. But you know what happened? The owner sold the company because he didn't want to deal with it. He sold the company. He's like, he actually split the company into two divisions. Our division, which was the media side of things, they moved the offices across the river, and then the printing division got sold off to somebody else, and there was no union. They hired mostly new people. Again, it sounds good on paper, but business owners, it's not good for business owners, obviously, if they're getting, you know, cheap labor, and a lot of times it will backfire. It will backfire. Now, if you find a business owner who's on board with it, or who has a heart for, you know, making sure everybody has a living wage and everyone's taken care of, et cetera, and you will find bosses like that, you know, then you're in a good place. But these blogs are struggling to survive, and the video game industry is incredibly cutthroat. Digital media is incredibly cutthroat, and the only way that a lot of these companies are getting ahead, unfortunately, and I'm not advocating this, but I'm saying is they're you know, using cheap labor. That's how they get ahead. You know, Gizmodo is on the decline. All their websites are on the decline. They can't afford to give, I don't think, kids fresh out of college $50,000 a year. We're seeing multiple people getting laid off. There was just a major layoff the end of December too, and I think it's going to continue until Gizmodo folds. I think that they'll either fold or they'll, you know, outsource more work overseas. The union's asking that the CEO get ousted. He's not going to have it. He just bought the company. He's like, screw you guys. I own the company. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. It's backfiring. Geo Media is accusing the union of harassing potential candidates as it tries to rebuild Deadspin. Yeah, they're going to be called scabs, et cetera. But, you know, the Geo Media as it exists now is not the same Geo Media that existed a year and a half ago that was, you know, owned by Univision and paying their entry-level employees $50,000 a year. I think Geo Media is going to go bluntly tits up pretty soon because they might just reorganize or shut it down to avoid dealing with the union. All right, Rooster Teeth. Now, there's no union at Rooster Teeth. Rooster Teeth, massive crunch time at Rooster Teeth. Again, I don't think anybody hid this. If you're going to work for a company like this, that you will be dealing with crunch time. I don't think people realized it was as bad as it was, but it was pretty bad. And once word got out of all the unpaid hours, it just snowballed all over the place on the internet. And, you know, I don't know what was going on internally, but, you know, we know what the biggest stories were. Warner Media came in, and AT&T, Warner Media AT&T bought Warner Media, which owns Rooster Teeth, and, you know, they're looking to clean house. They're looking to save money. Rooster Teeth was an easy target. They had, I don't know what their sales were like or whatever, but they were, clearly not in a good place with the press. Massive layoffs at Rooster Teeth. September, they had a massive restructuring and round of layoffs. They had more layoffs recently. There were some employees that have left or got pushed out in the last couple of weeks. We heard from Rooster Teeth employees that there were people leaving in March, but you didn't hear anything about it. So, I don't think there's, if there's no union at Rooster Teeth, clearly there isn't, that's not going to happen anytime soon. They're just going to get rid of people. But look at this. The Austin Chronicle said the most read stories dealing with tech in the Austin Chronicle last year, it was all bad news about Rooster Teeth. Layoffs, division head steps down, massive shakeup in management at Rooster Teeth. It just goes on and on and on. And that's not even talking about, the one VP that had domestic altercations and all the other bad news. But Rooster Teeth now, they're kind of in a bad place, because a lot of people are saying they're going to die, that Rooster Teeth is going to get, shut down completely. And this is a cautionary tale. This is, just side note here. This is a cautionary tale. This is why you don't sell your indie studio to a major corporation unless you're prepared to lose it. Because Rooster Teeth, as we know it, is gone. It's gone. And it probably will just become a brand, under the Warner umbrella, or get rolled into Cartoon Network or something. But they're trying to tell people that, hey, everything's fine. And we know it's not fine. We just did a video yesterday. It's not fine. But they have an ambitious 2020. They released a trailer talking about all the great things, all the great live action things coming to Rooster Teeth in 2020. Don't worry, guys. We're still here. We're still kicking. 3 new shows, including a Swedish furniture building game. A Swedish furniture building game. I'm guessing it's going to spoof IKEA, because IKEA furniture is frustratingly hard to build sometimes. But yeah, it's not a lot of good news associated with Rooster Teeth. I don't know if the crunch culture story had something to do with it or not. Kickstarter is trying to unionize. And it's kind of weird because Kickstarter, I can't imagine. Look, I don't know what the working conditions are like over there, but I don't think Kickstarter employees are putting in the hours that game developers are putting in or journalists are putting in, just kind of managing these projects. They're not really making a lot. They're just sort of shepherding these projects and all of that. I don't think they're, just armchair observation. It doesn't seem like, since the project managers are kind of doing their thing, it doesn't seem like these people would be working those kinds of hours. But they're looking to unionize, and now they're getting backlash from people who are anti-union. Some pretty big names like Neil Gaiman and David Cross. And, so Kickstarter, it's going to be really interesting because they've been catering more and more to a progressive audience, and now they're basically busting up unions. I don't know how that's going to look for them long term. I don't think it's going to work out very well. But usually what happens, and this is what I'm trying to get to here, and this is true in animation especially, if the company unionizes, a lot of times what happens is they will do whatever and they're anti-union. A lot of times what's going to happen for the good of the bottom line, their bottom line and their shareholders, is they will outsource the labor someplace else. They'll find cheaper labor. Oh, you guys want a minimum of $50,000 a year to write about video games? You're actually probably making more money than some of the people making the games. They'll be like, okay, fine. We're just going to outsource more of this work overseas, and we're going to pay these people next to nothing. And we did a story on Top Draw workers being, vastly underpaid, reportedly. Now, I've actually been in contact with people who have worked at Top Draw, and they said, no, it's being misrepresented. If you are entry level and you're not very good and you're not very fast, you're not going to make a lot of money, but as you work your way up the totem pole, you'll make more money. So there are two sides to every story, and I think part of it, and I do agree that working conditions can be absolutely horrendous at some of these companies. I absolutely agree. I've lived this. I've lived it, but again, there are usually other job options. Knowing that working for a media company, knowing that working in animation or comics or video games, or is going to be a massive time sink that goes above and beyond your 35, 40 hours a week or whatever. Knowing that, you can go into other industries. You know, you can go be a plumber or an electrician or something like that and get paid a hell of a lot more for the same amount of time. Probably be a hell of a lot more marketable because everybody's going to school now to work in digital media, and they're finding out that the jobs are disappearing because these companies are shutting down. These news outlets are shutting down. Animation studios are sending the work overseas. The only people who are actually, making any bank over here are the showrunners and storyboard artists, maybe, that are located here in the U.S. But most of the animation, the grunt animation, is actually being done overseas. The comic book industry. Everybody's freelance. And there was a call, I remember last year, and I remember literally laughing out loud, sitting at my desk, laughing out loud that the comic book industry, in its decimated state, wanted to unionize. There were people calling for a union now in the comic book industry. I'm like, the comic book industry is lucky if they can sell a couple of thousand books a month. There's no money to unionize the comic book industry. And you got to realize that too. As nice as this all sounds on paper, right? The money has to be there. And if the money's not there, then jobs get lost and the whole thing implodes. So, I don't have a solution. I'm going to be honest. People will be going like, well, what's your solution? I don't have one. I'm just telling you how things are. I'm telling you how things are. If they unionize, then it's probably going to lead to actually to more job loss. Because what's going to happen is now these video games are going to be so much more expensive to produce, which means that costs are going to have to be cut. That means that you're probably going to have fewer employees, or the companies are going to be so desperate to make a profit that they're going to start outsourcing more and more of the work overseas to non-union labor. And that's how it's going to go. Or they'll just shut down completely. And I really do think Gizmodo and Kotaku, they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone because of the union. I think they'll just shut the whole damn thing down rather than have to deal with the union. I've seen it happen before in my own personal career. So, I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Do you think this is going to be successful? Have any of you worked in the gaming industry? If you've worked in the gaming industry, if you got any inside scoops, shoot us an email, shout out at clownfishtv.com. It's in the contact. I'll try to get back to you. We get bombed with so many emails per week these days, guys. Sometimes it takes me a week or two even to get back to people, even if I see the email, because a lot of it winds up in the spam folder, and I do apologize. But going to be an interesting situation to watch. It's so weird to contrast all of the bad news about digital media, all the layoffs, all the shutdowns, with an attempt to unionize in 2020, because it's actually going to hasten the demise, in my personal opinion. So we'll talk later. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.